Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again today for another miniature. Today we're going to be doing this guy. Oh yeah. You have to love these like 90s Chaos Champions, right? They've got so much personality to them. Late 80s, 90s, I suppose. Chaos Champions. Now this one, I didn't manage to find a credit for him, although maybe I didn't look hard enough. But he's got a real Jazz Goodwin vibe to him, right? Like some of the earlier striking Scorpion miniatures have like a similar pose wherein they're sort of leaning into their weapon, looking menacingly towards the foe. Love this guy. He's amazing. I never owned this miniature back when I was collecting when I was younger, but recently I've managed to get hold of one and I am looking forward to this greatly. Um, while looking online for like color schemes for this miniature, I think I stumbled on some of Jacob Nielsen's work. You know, Jacob Nielsen's a real icon in the industry, and I remember looking at his paint jobs a lot when I was younger, and thinking if I would ever be able to get anywhere near as good as his work. Well, so true to form, he's done something quite amazing with this miniature. He's managed to make the armor not look like boring bone. So I think that I'm going to take a page from that book. I'm going to try to see if I can make the bone a little bit more interesting. And I will show you how. So let's just get started with this guy. I am going to grab a little bit of Skeleton Horde first. There we go. I'm gonna do a bit of Skeleton Horde, and as is my usual style. The model has been like prepared, with sand on the base, and I've put that's him over there. I put sand on the base. I've glued him on, and I've given him a Marauder shield. Some of you might recognize these really old Chaos, well, these old Marauder miniature shields. That's the outfit that was run by Trish and Ellie Morrison. Now Trish Carden today. Yeah, back in the day. And these shields, they have so much personality to them. They're amazing. As much as I love a hand-painted shields, these ones love a hand-painted shield, sorry. These shields kind of take me back. I love these models. So yeah, I thought that was a really good way to counterbalance the weight of the miniature, sort of give him, a little bit more structure to his stance. But yeah, so Skeleton Horde, that's over there, as is usually my way of doing things. A little bit of contrast medium, and then after that I'm going to put on a little bit of Gryph Charger Grey, and I think that's going to change the personality of the bone color that I use eventually, because that's going to make it a little bit more cold. Now this is a Khorne miniature, or at least I'm going to paint him as a Khorne miniature. To be fair, I don't know if this predated the idea of specific champions of the Chaos Gods. This guy kind of has a kind of unique vibe to him. He almost looks more like an undead model than a Chaos Champion. So I think what I'm going to do is to make the bone a little bit less warm, but I'm going to introduce some red into his color scheme so that he works well with the rest of the Khorne regiment. Eventually, I'm hoping to have an entire unit of all of these various champions, and I think that would be quite a sight to see. So yeah, Skeleton Horde, Contrast Medium, and Gryph Charger Grey over there. So let's put these all together. As before, remember that you need to saturate your brush with water first before letting it touch contrast paint, because there is a risk of it traveling up the ferrule and damaging the bristles. You know that if you ever wondered why some of your brushes very prematurely start to fishtail, that means start to split apart. That's basically why. The undercoat for this model, as always, is my favorite Pylox off-white color. The name specifically, gosh, you would think I would have like gotten it correct by now. You know what? I am going to check right now, and I'm going to just run over and grab it. Alright, I am back. Now I told you that all the mistakes are going to be on this channel, and I'm going to show you all of them. I'm not going to edit any of them away. So yeah, in this case, my mistake was to not get it on in hand early. But yeah, there we go. Number 38, matte gray white, Nippon Paint Pylox. I love this stuff. It goes on really smooth, gives it nice coverage, and like I mentioned before in the past, it's got an off-white kind of color, right? And as a result, contrast paint goes over it really well. It creates for a less, I guess, fluorescent finish. A lot of contrast paint tends to go over a miniature and makes it look really artificial. But this Undercoat seems to do a lot better at making it a more realistic tone. And something about it really works well with contrast paint. So as you can see, the combination of Gryphcharger Grey and Skeleton Horde is giving us a little bit of a cooler color for the bone. Cool as in more towards the blue spectrum. And I think that's going to work well with the rest of the color scheme, which is going to be paired. I mean, this color is going to be paired with bronze, essentially, and a bit of red, where it makes sense for it to be introduced into the color scheme. Maybe on the sword, right? I haven't really worked it out in my head, but I will figure it out as we go along. And of course, you know, painting is one of those hobbies where you kind of need to. You probably best served by having a rough idea of where you want to end up, but to plan it down to just every like single detail means that you close off a lot of creativity in the process. And it's that creativity, that sort of like thinking on the fly, that makes it fun for me, I feel. Yeah, that's why I enjoy it. I find that I do some of my best thinking when I'm just painting and just enjoying the process of putting colors onto a miniature. And yeah, I think that's kind of why I do it. Now you might be wondering why I've chosen to this weird like format of completing an entire miniature on camera every day. I think all of us have miniatures lying around like unpainted, right? Something about the way miniatures are sold these days by Games Workshop, for example. There is a tendency for us to have more miniatures than we'll probably ever need or probably be able to do, like just lying around. And I think hopefully this will give us some impetus to get the models that we have lying around out and painted, right? Like work to sort of fix that mountain of lead that we have. Oh, well, mountain of lead was how it was in the day. Now, mountain of lead, mountain of plastic, I suppose, is how it is now. And yeah, hopefully, you know, crack out a model, do a little bit every day, and as a result, you know, finish an entire collection or an army in short order. Well, relatively short anyway. Either way, hopefully this makes it more of an interesting process. As I mentioned many times in the past before, I think the idea is to show you all of the mistakes that I make along the way. I think that's a lot more authentic, right? Sometimes you watch like painting videos, not naming any names. I love watching painting videos. You know, some of the videos on YouTube have given me like really amazing inspiration. Like, yeah, but I think the idea is that I want to be able to show you all the errors that I commit. I want to show you basically how I go about thinking about painting models, how it's kind of led me to develop like an aesthetic sense on the fly in response to the way colors turn out on the miniature and so on. Plus, I think, yeah, I think editing. I mean, we've all watched like painting videos where, you know, like the whole act of putting paint on miniatures is kind of wasted when you have a wash and then like a wipe rather, and then the miniature is just suddenly done to a level that we cannot possibly achieve because it's been done off camera and it probably took like many hours. Now, in real life, you know, we would spend hours on these miniatures, but I think with the size of collections these days, you want to spend a lot of time on a miniature getting it just right? But you also don't want to spend like days painting one miniature unless you're doing competition painting. I like to go for a happy medium, and I like to show you my process in detail so that you know nothing is being hidden. Everything you get to watch in real time unfold. For those of you who enjoy this format, this style of presentation, great, please hang around. I hope you get lots out of this. And for those who just want to see the finished product, you are always welcome to forward to the end and critique what I've put together within this time frame. I do, on occasion, go back to these miniatures and make small adjustments, as is the way. I think that's a natural part of the process. I even mentioned that I've even mentioned in previous videos that I have a tendency to go back to a lot of these miniatures to add additional highlights or to tweak and adjust. I think that's just part of the process. I will cover all of these changes that I make to miniatures that you may not have seen. It's not coming from the desire to hide anything. It's more along the lines of I think there is a natural tendency to spot things that you think you can improve and do better with, and then do that off camera. I mean, I know I have seen things on my miniatures when I just feel compelled to fix them. So for example, I might spot a mistake, or I could go, well, that's a color that I didn't really enjoy. But yeah, not necessarily going to be on camera, although I might have a video where I go through all of these little edits and changes at some point, once enough of these videos have gone up. Yeah, so anyway, let me know what you think of these paint jobs, I think, and I will take into account your feedback. I will promise to read, if not to necessarily apply, because, well, that's just the way of things, isn't it? It's always good to have your own style and to filter feedback through your own personal lens. And it's for that reason I think I don't necessarily say this is something that anyone should necessarily follow. This is just a style of painting that I've developed over time. This very sort of thin contrast layered approach where I de-emphasize highlighting and focus instead on shading things incrementally. I just found that it's something that's really worked for me. I enjoy the process a lot more, and I get to see the model develop in front of me. Plus, as you get older, as I am, your eyesight starts to go down the tubes. And this method of painting, because of the way it works with successive layers of contrast paint, really helps to make it so that you don't need to squint to pick out details. That's why I don't undercoat in black like I used to, and then build up colors in layers. I used to have to struggle to try to pick out the details, right, and sort of guess at what's on the surface of the model. This style of painting doesn't require that. It just requires that you adapt to the details as they kind of unfold on the surface of the miniature. So lots of time now being spent on putting on this overall bone coat, but I hope you can see that just cutting the contrast paint with a bit of medium and applying it, fairly liberally, but not over much, I feel. Not too heavily. You'll notice that I load my brush very regularly with a small amount of paint. I go to the wet palette over and over again quite regularly, and then apply it essentially where I feel is needed, as opposed to flooding the surface. I feel that gives me really good results. But of course, your mileage will vary, and you can adapt this to your preference, as the case may be. So the downside, of course, I've realized with this style of presentation is, some of the areas take a long time to dry. I mean, it's just the nature of cutting contrast paint, right? And like diluting it. It tends, even with contrast medium, to take slightly longer to dry. But you know what? That means I think we can be a little bit more thoughtful about the process and just let things unfold in a natural kind of way. So I'm just checking over the surface to make sure I haven't missed anything. And as it turns out, yep, there we go, I've missed something. This little flange on the edge. That's a funny word. Flange on the edge of this piece of bone armor on his elbows. Yeah. There we go. So yeah, I'm loving this color so far. I think it reads as bone visually, but it also has a little bit more personality to it. The blue really takes the edge of that cartoony bone color that you sometimes get with Games Workshop's Skeleton Horde, right? Bone isn't in real life. I don't think it's as cream colored as that paint would seem to suggest. So I think it's just a case of applying a little bit of observation on like more, I guess just observing real life examples of bone. And I guess I'm referencing kind of like a fossil or an ossified like bone surface, and I think that kind of bone has a lot more personality and a lot more staining. And maybe that would work better. So the reason why I'm going about using this color is because I intend to introduce red somewhere into the color scheme. I think with white highlights, this bone will look pretty nice and desaturated, and therefore it might work well with something more subtle. Maybe something along the lines of bronze, perhaps? Bronze or red? It's okay, I'll think about it. Yeah. So I'm kind of loving how this is looking so far, but I think it's going to take a little while to dry. So yeah, I think I might move on to just doing the base then. Now, I like to use the base as something to do while large areas of the model are still drying. I find that the base itself takes forever to dry anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and do this right now, save a bit of time later. So this is Agros Dunes, right? My mix of Agros Dunes, and I'm going to apply it directly to the base. So this might cause some of you to cringe, but I find that using the dropper bottle directly on the surface is just fine. I tend to stick with a generic kind of wasteland finish, just this applied over that spray undercoat, right? And it gives me a sort of interesting visual base to work off. I usually consider things like rocks or sand or additional sand, like maybe like chunks of gravel or even like vegetation, like static grass over the surface. I think it really depends on the model, but I think this is a versatile enough color that really gives you a good base to work on. And the thing about Agros Dunes is that because it is essentially a combination of sepia and umber, you have raw umber. I mean, you have quite a lot of nuance in this color and a bit of vibrancy, so that really allows you to create a base that, while ostensibly still brown, right, and therefore likely to recede into the overall color scheme, it's still vibrant enough that it has a bit of personality, and it helps to offset some of the colors of the miniatures, of the miniature proper. And I really like the sort of look that this gives. All right, so there we go. Yeah, so that's given the bone areas a little bit more time to dry. Gotta be a bit careful the way I angle this in the meantime, because there is quite a lot of this. Maybe I'll wick some of it off. Don't mind me. Take some of this off so that it doesn't slosh around quite so badly. Yeah, just a little bit. And then let me just put this away. So every day, the idea is I will pick a different miniature to paint. It'll be a miniature that I can comfortably finish within the duration of this video. That usually comes to about maybe an hour or so, but I think I will let it take as long as it needs to take, because I think that's really how. Yeah, I mean, I don't intend to rush myself too badly for these videos. I have just noticed that I might want to do the back of this bits in bone as well. I'm really going for the areas that kind of have a very distinct bone texture. Now this guy, he's completely armored, right? Like he's covered head to toe. There's not a shred of flesh exposed anywhere. And I think that kind of leads, that kind of lends the, it kind of leads to the rather uncomfortable idea that he might not be human anymore under all that armor. And I think that's a really cool narrative idea. Oops, missed the spot over here. Another flange of his knee pad this time. Glad I caught that. Yeah. So that's a little bit over here that I missed. And then I'm going to go right ahead and I'm going to put some of it into the gaps between his armor as well. It's got a nice little skull detail in the back of his leg over there. Such an interesting miniature visually. Yeah, plus such a simple but nice pose. I think all too often miniatures of this era, a lot of them just look like they're just waving their weapon around threateningly. And I get the idea, right? Why that was designed that way. It's so that, you know, from afar, a group of them can look like a meaningful group of soldiers, like proffering their weapons. That really allows them to help you understand what they're armed and equipped with, so you know what to do with them on the war games battlefield. But the downside to that is that the poses can look a little bit samey sometimes. This guy, with just how deliberate he's being with his weapon, love it. It just looks like he's out to threaten you. Yeah, I think I'm gonna keep the horns and the rest of his helmet different color, just so that we have a bit of separation. Might do that in black. Bronze for the armor bits, black for the helmet, a bit of red on the shield, a bit of red on the sword maybe. Yeah, I think we've got the beginnings of an interesting color scheme. So, sorry, I'm going to move my water to the right side, don't mind me. I'm going to wash that out. So, with that in mind, the next step is going to be blocking in a lot of the silver. Yeah, you can see that my base color has kind of started to wick around a bit. Sorry about that, a bit messy, but sometimes painting is messy. Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is not a fast hobby by any means, right? Like, I think the idea that, you know, somehow though everybody seems to be obsessed with the idea of speed painting these days, it's just not the way I choose to engage with this hobby. I am still setting myself a reasonable amount of time to complete a miniature, but I think it's really about choosing miniatures that really speak to you and have something really interesting about them, just like this guy. That creates for a more engaged painting experience, more so than necessarily just focusing on like hordes of the same kinds of models. I've done that in the past, right? I've at this point I've collected maybe like easily like 10 like armies of fair size, I would say, averaging about maybe 150 to 200 miniatures each, right? Out of that, a lot of them have been the same miniature over and over again. I've done orcs for 40k, that's a horde army, so lots and lots and lots of more or less identically equipped boys. I've done like dark elves, for example, which have a very regimented appearance for Warhammer Fantasy. One day I might show those off on this channel, we'll see. A lot less fun than actually doing something on channel like this though. I hope you agree. Yeah, but yeah, so the idea of doing lots and lots and lots of repetitive models, kind of not really my thing anymore, because I've done it a lot in the past, and I feel like this way might be a lot more fun to just more deliberately approach the process of painting a model a day, right? Lavishing all the individual time and effort on it, and taking it from there to see maybe we'll get a decent sized collection of these guys eventually. Plus, these models are a joy to paint, right? And they're fairly simple. Like the details are fairly well chosen and not over cluttered, which is something I really like about these earlier miniatures from 4th edition and before, which is when I was a young one, starting to collect these guys. So let's do the plate armor. So I think conceptually the idea is maybe the thought that this guy as a chaos worshipper, as a champion of like just a starting, you know, chaos warrior, maybe he started out with bronze armor, right? A brass sort of suit of armor that he found somewhere. Maybe he began, you know, with a suit of regular iron armor, and it turned to brass as he gradually became more and more Khorne like. You know, Khorne's colors famously being red and brass and black. Although red and brass, I think, is the way it's usually expressed in the lore. I would imagine that maybe this guy started as a more generic warrior with a suit of armor, and then he gradually got more and more of a Khorne worshipper, became more and more of a Khorne worshipper over time. And I would imagine that as he became more and more Khorne-like, I kind of imagine just the idea that he becomes more and more distant and maybe a little bit more impassive and just, threatening overall. I think Khorne characters get a bad rap, right? They tend to typically be portrayed as like incoherent savages, like just sort of screaming their lungs out at the enemy as they run at them with the biggest axe they can find. This guy's pose, I think, has a lot more menace, and he seems to be armed with something more like a cutlass. Right? That's a really interesting weapon to choose, right? Well, it's not a cutlass because the blade is straight, so it's more like a basket hilted, almost like a Scottish broadsword, I guess. I don't know, but yeah, it's such an interesting choice of weapon, right? In fact, this guy read so little as a Chaos champion visually that I gave him this shield because this shield is so overtly Chaos-like. With the berserker horns on the shield shape. I thought it was something that would help maybe reinforce the idea that he's Khornate, even if the color scheme didn't mark him out as a worshipper of the blood god. I don't know. Must have done that subconsciously, now that I think about it. Yeah. As I recall, this original miniature, when it was pictured in White Dwarf, it was kind of shown with a round shield, I think. I seem to recall him being armed with a round shield. But round shields kind of, although I love the idea of a round shield, and in real life I think round shields are just the handiest to have. You can ride a horse with a round shield, you can sort of advance with it on foot. Because it's round, it has no... It's kind of got universal protection depending on how you swivel it, right? Whereas a lot of kite shields, for example, have a direction to them. So yeah, this particular shield really helped with the Chaos silhouette. I like the way it's visually interesting even on the underside because of the shape, and just gives a really good silhouette. Yeah, it's a bit on the big side, but I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, so he's got a really interesting weapon, a really interesting stance that maybe shows a little bit more premeditation, a little bit more care. He's not blindly charging on the attack, which is just very nice to see. Yeah, that he's not the typical Khorne champion. So one issue with base coating with Vallejo Silver, I think I forgot to mention that this is Vallejo Silver, Model Air Silver. It's the best silver I've ever used. Love it. Yeah. So one challenge with applying this over my favorite undercoat color is that it tends to not read very well visually, and sometimes you have to check over and over again to see whether or not you've actually covered an area. I have actually painted models where I left whole sections of the model, like I've missed whole sections with the silver paint. But funnily enough, when you apply a wash over it, as I am going to do, it doesn't seem to matter as much. It seems to look quite good even if you do apply it over this undercoat, which to me says that this undercoat has a versatility to it I'm enjoying. So instead of painting him with bronze colored paint, what I typically tend to do is to apply this extremely shiny Vallejo silver paint and then apply a colored wash over it. In this case, the wash will be some variation of Gorgrunta fur, which is that reddish sort of brown mahogany kind of color, which I think adds just the right amount of bronziness to the surface. Yeah, I just mentioned that I would miss spots, and here's a big chunk I missed. Oh, right. So his cod piece. I think in the past I've mentioned that I have a tendency to try to paint models to with the idea that your eye will be drawn to certain areas and that you kind of want to downplay the visibility of others. So in this case, yeah, I really want to de-emphasize the codpiece simply because, yeah, drawing your eye there is just going to look a little bit strange, right? He doesn't exactly have a loincloth, which is something that a lot of Chaos miniatures have. So he doesn't have that spot of color near his crotch. So not picking it out in a different color avoids that look like he's wearing, the whole thing where he looks like he's wearing underwear. And that's not something that you want to see. I mean, last thing you want to see is a Chaos Warrior running at you with Speedos. Although, to be fair, there are Chaos Warriors that might do that as a tactic. Extra terrifying for that reason. Okay, cool. I'm happy with where I'm going to be doing the silver / bronze once I apply the wash. I'm gonna give the bone areas a little bit more time to dry. I still see a few wet spots here and there. And then I'm just gonna probably work on that sword because that's an opportunity for us to introduce red into the color scheme so that he better works with his Khorne brothers when the rest of the unit is joining him. So my usual mix for red, my favorite mix is Blood Angels red and Gryphhound orange. Gryphhound orange, yeah. So this is a 50-50 mix, and I find it gives me all the orange I need while going really nice and rich red in the recesses. This I feel gives me, I think what the orange does is it kind of removes any tendency towards pink, which is particularly appropriate for miniatures that you want to be a kind of angry, vibrant red. Yeah. So, I mean, case in point, I love using the stuff for Chaos Dwarfs in particular because Chaos Dwarfs have even though the miniatures are kind of like comical to look at with their giant hats, they're also kind of humorless and direct. So using a red that sort of takes away the vibrance and dynamism of pink and just sort of leaves this no nonsense shade of red, I think that kind of works better with their personality. Of course, you kind of have to do his eyes in red as well, right? Yeah, there we go. So that again leads to the idea or sort of strengthens the idea that there's not much of a man underneath this suit of armor anymore. He's, in that sense, he's one of the more extreme Chaos champions because he's so visibly changed by his affiliation to Chaos. And that's a lovely idea, isn't it? Yeah, lots of personality, lots of uniqueness. Okay, alright, I am considering what to do next. More than likely, I think it's time to wash down the bronze bits. Cool, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to get some Gore Grunter flesh, I keep calling it Gore Grunter flesh. Gore Grunter fur, right, that's this stuff. So a little bit of this. On its own, I think it's a bit too strong and it's a bit too red. So I like to cut it with a little bit of Seraphim Sepia that both thins down the color a little bit, makes it a little bit less intense, and it also leads it more towards a yellowish tinge. Sorry, I hope you can see that. Yeah, so that's this blob over here. And I think this really gives us quite an intense and attractive shade of bronze when applied over this bright Vallejo silver. Yeah. So earlier I mentioned, or in another video, I mentioned the idea of how working with contrast paint helps with the way you differentiate sections on the surface of a model. You do this by just letting the capillary action build up a bit of color on the edges between two colors. So for example, like where the bone meets the bronze, you get a little bit more of an interesting dividing line. So interestingly enough, the Vallejo silver is changing the surface tension of the mix a little bit and causing it to pool, but not to worry. Whenever this happens, whenever you use a silver paint where it's, I guess, so slick and smooth and shiny, ooh, that's bad. That's a little pocket of wet paint. It's okay, we'll fix that. So another, I mean, not to harp on this too much, but the reason why I love what this series has done for my painting is that I get to show how I deal with errors on camera, and I think that makes me a better teacher. So a bit about my painting career. I started painting, I mean, my first miniatures I received when I was 11, many decades ago. And so this was back in the 90s, right? So to give you a bit of context, the first miniatures I ever painted were the Milton Bradley Hero Quest ones. And there was a little brochure that shipped with the boxed game. So I recall I was traveling in the UK at the time with my family, and essentially we found it in a, I think it was Harrods, I think, in London, and we saw the game. It was full of miniatures. I'd never seen anything like that before, and my brother and I got it as a present, which is amazing. And for my brother, I think the miniatures didn't quite grab hold of his. I mean, he could appreciate the fact that there were miniatures, and the miniatures look great and everything, but I don't think it quite grabbed onto him the way it did me. And as a result, I ended up getting really into the idea of painting these miniatures because of that brochure that shipped with the box game. And what my dad did was he actually took that brochure, and this is back in the 90s, right? So at this point, I mean, the game was a few years old already, so I don't even know whether Games Workshop was really honoring their promise. But on that brochure, there was the idea that you could write in to them via snail mail, and somebody at Games Workshop, bless him or her, as the case may be, saw that handwritten note from my dad that got sent to their postbox, and replied with a Citadel catalog, which is one of my earliest memories. Love those things to bits. I still refer to them from time to time, and that's really why I have an affinity with miniatures, which, by all accounts, at least a decade older than I am, or else were sculpted when I was probably too young to appreciate them, but I still love them nonetheless because of the earlier Games Workshop publications that I got to read, and therefore formed the basis of my learning experience painting miniatures. It's probably also why I like the idea of doing these videos, because I can teach people to paint, or I can at least pass along some of the knowledge that I've gained from a time when I was essentially having to guess how these amazing miniatures were painted from the pages of a catalog. Now, that is hard, right? That's hard work, because I'm sure you can tell that learning how to paint from a catalog isn't the easiest thing in the world, especially in the context of today, where we've got no end of really talented people showing you how to paint in real time in videos. And but of course, that takes me down the path of, well, then why aren't they showing you everything, including the errors that you make? And is really the genesis of this channel. So yeah, now I'm really liking this combination of colors on this miniature now. now that I look at it. Something very pleasing about how the bone, because of the Gryph Charger grey that we added to it, almost has a slightly green tinge. And I think that green tinge is serving to offset the extreme redness of the bronze or copper, I suppose. Maybe it's more towards copper kind of wash. And yeah, I think that's working out quite nicely. So there are little errors with the way the paint is flowing on the surface. I think I will fix this. I also try to keep the model on screen. I'm so sorry if I seem to be drifting off. I drift off camera a lot when when I'm really enjoying painting the model, and I'm really enjoying painting this guy. Before I started this video, honestly, I was in a bit of a was a bit uncertain as to how to approach the color scheme, because I've seen this guy painted by so many talented people, right? And it's such an iconic piece, and I kind of wanted to do justice to this model by picking out all the interesting details without going down a well-trodden path. Because I think the tendency is to paint this model in fairly generic red and black, or red and brass, or just like a preponderance of bone, and of just regular cream colored bone, and that I don't think that will look very interesting. Plus it might not fit the Khorne aesthetic quite well, which is a lot more gritty, a lot more serious, a little bit more realistic, less cartoony bone. For example, I think this guy, if I had just gone with like standard cream, I might have ended up something that looked a little bit more like, I don't know, Skeletor, which would have been a terrible thing, because it takes away the menace of this really cool miniature. Yeah. So yeah. Okay, so as you can see, we're beginning to get something that looks a little bit more like brass, but because of the fluid dynamic of or rather the way this silver paint has actually quite low surface tension, is kind of affecting how it's pooling. But because we are being patient and slowly putting the paint where it needs to be, the color where it needs to be, as opposed to just flooding the surface, which is something that has annoyed me about contrast paint marketing, to be perfectly honest, because it's such a wonderful tool for adding translucent layers of color, and just unlocking things like glazing and feathering and so on and so forth. But the way it was marketed in the early days of contrast paint was to just say, well, just flood the surface like a wash with it, and I don't think that's quite correct. It's so much more nuanced and interesting than that, than a blunt instrument kind of gravity style of paint, which frankly puts you at the mercy of gravity, isn't it? And miniatures have all sorts of little imperfections on the surface. None of these models are actually like, I mean, they're more perfect now that digital sculpting is a thing. But I think, yeah, the little imperfections on the surface can sometimes cause like capillary action or surface tension to react. It can cause paint to react in unexpected ways, and I don't think that's great for like just the quality of the end result. So I prefer this more considered, more directed approach, more deliberate approach. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so not to worry about the surface tension. The first coat might be a bit patchy, but I think as we build up layers of color and correct certain areas, I think we'll get something that approaches a good finish. It's just that there might be a little bit more of an ugly stage, and you know what? Ugly stages are just fine, because we are on our way to something better. Yeah, slightly strange pooling under here, and then there is that weird void in the center of his shield. I'll probably do that just in a nondescript dark color. Maybe because I didn't pick that out in silver, thankfully, I might end up doing that in just like a deep brown color to de-emphasize it, rather than draw attention to it by using an eye-catching color like this copper, bronze, brass, all of those. So brass is an alloy, right? It's an alloy. It's not an actual like element. So it's not a pure metal by any means. It's got basically different colors depending on what you add to it to create the alloy. So it really gives you scope to do different, like brass, different ways. Brass typically, as far as I understand it, has an almost yellow kind of look to it. It's kind of like gold, but less, I suppose, lustrous. But I kind of like the way this sort of copper colored metal looks, because I think it's got better contrast with the bone. Plus, it's got it's tending towards that family of red colors that I think the rest of this fellow's peers are likely to have on their armor. I've picked up quite a number of these, so I'll get to do them all in time. So this man is just the first of his unit, and I intend to showcase them all to you in all their glory. And I'll get to tell you a little bit about how these miniatures all seem to have an amazing individual personality. I mean, essentially what I'm intending to build is a unit of heroes, all of which are unique and have like these special traits to them. Like this guy, such a unique chap. Yeah, there we go. So, I hope I didn't wander off camera too much there or ramble on too much. But yeah, such is how it is when you're painting a model that you have a real strong affinity with. Never found this model in a brick and mortar shop. Only found him much later in life, and when I found him, I had to have it because it's such an iconic piece. Yeah. So I'm gonna work around his collar, and hopefully when this colors dry a little bit more, we can start to, spend a little bit of time organizing the highlights in a way that sort of sets off the three-dimensionality of it. What about you guys? What models, if any, kind of got you at the right stage of life, kind of made an impression on you and made you like want to take like steps into miniature collecting and painting? I'm sure there are iconic like miniatures for every era, right? And I'm sure everybody has a sculpt or two that when they saw, kind of inspired them to go, wow, okay, I really must have this at some point, in my hobby. And was it a miniature that you could get immediately, or was it something that kind of lingered rent-free in your mind, just like this guy did for me? And then you could never get him because he wasn't in stores. Because that's one of the things that characterizes Games Workshop these days, right? A little bit more that FOMO marketing. Did you miss out on a model that you regret? Which was your holy grail miniature that you always wanted to have but never had the chance, or just didn't have the funds at the time? Models are expensive, so I completely relate. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm kind of happy with the way this guy is looking so far. It's taking a bit of time, but sometimes it's okay to let it take a bit of time. It's allowing me to correct little inconsistencies. Now, I think the moral of the story at this point is that sometimes when you use a metal paint, even though I love this Vallejo metal paint to bits, it was unexpectedly shiny on this miniature, and therefore the surface was a bit too slick for the contrast paint to really do its thing, and it started to pull strangely in certain spots. So let me wick off this arrow over here. Oh, one of the advantages of working with contrast paints, not to digress too much, but is that you can actually wipe it off the surface with a wet, clean brush. Not sopping wet, but damp, clean brush, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, one of the lessons, as I was saying, is you get to let the first coat dry, come in again with successive layers of contrast paint, and basically fix inconsistencies on the surface. Like here, it's a bit messy over there, a bit rough on this edge of the shield. Can come back in now that the paint is dry and fix that, right? And the whole point of painting in this way is to make it so that you spend less time on highlights, which take a lot of time and can be a little bit messy. Oftentimes you see miniatures which look really nice, but then are kind of ruined by the highlights a little bit because they've either been too heavy and clunky, or else the highlights are not exactly in the same place and don't quite respect the surface geometry of the figure. So yeah, taking a bit more of the original bone color and making sure that all the shades are at a level that they should be. Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So his face. What happens to his face? Now I've seen a paint job where the painter did his face in black. And that's kind of stuck with me because it was so unexpected, right? Generally speaking, the focal point of a miniature is his face, and to so boldly just do it in black, which by all accounts is the wrong color to use, kind of did it for me, right? It added personality to the miniature by using an uncharacteristic color. So as I reach over to my paint rack, let's use some Black Templar, right? So there's a lot of like thoughts about whether or not Black Templar or Black Legion, which one should be your go-to color. My thoughts are quite clear. Black Templar is it. Black Templar has a bit of blue in it, a bit of nuance to it, which is something that you can discover when you add contrast medium to Black Templar. You find that it, like those like chromatogram experiments where you let a paint separate over a damp piece of paper, blotting paper. You can see that Black Templar actually separates very interestingly into more of a blue kind of hue, right? And that blue actually looks, in my opinion, much better than the straight black that you get with Black Legion. Doesn't mean that Black Legion doesn't have its uses, for sure, but I think generally speaking, I prefer Black Templar. I think it just looks better because it's got a little bit of personality to it. It's got a bit of blue in the recesses. Oops, went a bit too heavy over there, but it's okay, we'll pick that out later. Another color that has, another black, I guess, that has a lot of blue in it, is doing that there in the recess might be a bit too intense. I think I won't do that. Another black contrast-like paint is the Vallejo Express. What's it called? The black one. It is called Black Lotus. This stuff has far more of the blue in it, and therefore it's a very worthy addition to your arsenal of contrast paints and contrast-like paints. I think they give you a lot of options. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little bit of the Gore Grunter fur again, with a little bit of the black on the palette, and I'm going to make a very dark brownish color, and I'm just going to work that into this area over here. Didn't want to use solid black because I think that makes it artificially dark. It doesn't respect the geometry of the model, because this is not such a deep recess that it warrants the use of something as dark as just pure black. But a sort of dark brown shade like this really makes much more sense to, at least to my eyes. Right? You can tell that it's in an area of shadow. De-emphasizes its importance to the overall look of the miniature, and just forms a really interesting backdrop for the miniature, that, or those parts of the miniature that will be more in the foreground when viewed from this angle. So again, slightly messy, but not to worry, we'll clean this up a little bit. Now, I'm not sure how long this miniature will take to paint because looking at my timer, I am 50 minutes in, but that's because I think I've rambled a bit with this one. I hope you guys don't mind that. I will take as long as I need to finish this to a level that I'm happy to have it put aside. I might come back to it in the future, but yeah, I think that's just fine. So you just saw me like rip off a section of contrast paint that wasn't fully dry. Oops, happens. Touch up with your paint on your wet palette and we should be alright. I'll come back to that later. Yeah, cool. Alright, so now what I need to do is do something with the horns and then kind of finish up the look of the bone that I'm trying to achieve. So what I'm going to do is go back to the red momentarily, and I'm going to add some definition to this area over here. So the nice thing about contrast paints is that yes, they're translucent. They're translucent with a gentle application, meaning you don't use the full intensity of the color, and you can come back in and you can add additional emphasis with successive layers, just like I'm doing to this sword over here to kind of reinforce that blade shape. And by doing this, you can have something that rapidly, looks a little bit more defined and more shapely without resorting yet to a highlight that can come later. Now, the next thing I want to do is to I'm going to spend a bit more time on the bronze, really, because I think it's still really patchy in places. Yeah, let's do that. Why not? So, as before, Seraphim Sepia, 2 drops. Gorgrunter Fur, which is the much stronger color, 1 drop. And because now we have at least a layer of contrast on most of the silver, if not all of it, to work over, I think that should allow us to have a bit more control over the color. There we go. So we can start to correct areas where it hadn't leveled correctly because of the metal finish, the finish of the silver paint below it. There we go. So yeah, sometimes like I said, this isn't a fast hobby. So sometimes knowing the recipes isn't. I don't think we should be painting from a recipe necessarily. Well, okay. Let me rephrase that. Sometimes it makes sense, right? Sometimes like when painting is just busy work, when you're just trying to finish a unit, or you've got like some other kind of time constraint, like maybe it's the eve of a tournament or something, and you're just rushing things along. I get it. There is a time and place for that kind of painting, but when you have an opportunity to spend a little bit more time on painting what is essentially an individual miniature with unique characteristics and design, it can be a real joy to just feel your way around a color scheme, think about it and just be a bit more thoughtful about the choices of colors and how they interact on the surface. And yeah, that can be a very pleasing way to approach like the painting of miniatures. And also it allows you a little bit more leeway to correct things as they occur, because it's not a science really, it's more of an art. It's the cliche, but slowly taking your time with it to respond to the miniature as it progresses can be really enjoyable. Yeah, like so. So yes, the contrast paint is responding a lot better to the surface now, and that means that we can start to work on the smoothness of these blends now that the first coat is essentially fixing the the shininess, or rather the slickness of the Vallejo metal surface. We can start to be a bit more deliberate about how we do this rather than be at the mercy of the gloss, the sheen on the miniature, as it were. Yeah. Yep. A bit more of this shade color to pull the bronze bits away from the bone, I think would help with the look of the miniature. I think that would create more interest visually. Yeah, and you know, painting one miniature at a time, although it's not for all of us, you know, hopefully it lets you sort of stop and appreciate the work done so far, because you know, when you're batch painting a large number of miniatures, sometimes it can feel like, you know, you've made no progress at all. But look at how far this model has come. I know it's been an hour, but it's been a really fun hour, and it hasn't felt like an hour. Such a cool model. Gosh. Okay, I'll stop. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I like that a lot. Okay, cool. So I'm feeling a lot better about the copper bits. Still some areas to touch up, like over there where it's gotten a little bit messy, but we can fix that because we have the color that we used, right? The wash as well as the silver there, and it's just a simple case of mixing the two and applying some highlights to sort of establish, you know, to reinforce the geometry of the surface, right? Okay, cool. So we've got the horns, and I've been wondering what color to do the horns. I think it would not go amiss to do them in Gryphcharger Grey, actually. Since we've got a little bit of that in the bone armor sections, I think it would not go amiss to use this color. Plus, it would introduce a bit of a cool spot on the miniature so that it offsets all of the intensity of the rest of the figure. So that makes him hopefully look a little bit more nuanced and not so formulaic. The good news is that when it comes time to actually painting undead models, of which I've already acquired a few, not to worry, all undead fans out there, myself included, undead were my main army. I love undead models, especially the old Games Workshop, like Gary Morley ones. They're not the coolest looking models, but they've got a lot of personality to them, and they sort of look like they could be real. Like they've all got backstories, in my opinion. But yeah, anyway. So where was I going with this? Oh, right. So the undead, I think I will do in a more traditional bone color. This Khorne miniature, this champion of Khorne, deserves to be in something a little bit more distinct. He's got a pouch over here, and I think that's just an opportunity for me to reintroduce red. Even though it's quite close to the sword, I think it is good to make sure that when you use a bold color on a miniature as part of a miniature scheme, that you use it in more than one place if you can. Don't make it so that it's just one isolated color in the middle of nowhere. I think that's an easy way to draw the eye too far away from it, or rather draw the eye too strongly. Maybe too much for too much emphasis is not ideal, especially if it's just something as basic as a pouch. But because there's already red on the sword, your eye isn't drawn exclusively to the area. It just becomes a supporting visual, and it almost disappears into the overall color scheme because the sword is so much more important and so much more eye-catching. Okay, so bronze is looking better and better the more I apply. But I think there is a danger with over applying it, because it can lead you down the path of turning it into something that's a bit too strong, too red. So yeah, I'm being a bit more careful as I apply this. And if it turns out too much, too intense, then there's always the option of mixing the color into the silver, and then applying it as a bit of a highlight where it needs it. Yeah. So that's the careful line you have to walk when you are using contrast paints, I feel. Over apply it. I mean, the whole point of contrast paint, right, was to with one coat of paint create multiple shades on the surface, multiple like versions of the same color on the surface. So for example, where it would flow off the raised points, it would create a lighter color, a paler version of itself. But where it collected in the recesses, for example, it would create a darker version of itself, and therefore you get something that resembled highlights and shading, right? So that's a very clunky way of explaining the way surface tension creates like patterns on the surface, right? Based on the relative sort of recess and raisedness of it. Yeah. So applying contrast paint too strongly, in my opinion, just kind of undoes a lot of that good work, and it causes you to lose colors on the surface. You lose the lighter points in favor of more dark colors. So sometimes it's good to re-establish that with some highlights. So I've gone ahead and mixed some of this with the silver. Unfortunately, it looks like it might be a bit too thin, but I think we can carefully apply it. Hopefully it goes where we want it to go. So this is fairly close to the original color, but I think the idea is just to even out some points. You know what? It's not fully dry yet. I will be very careful with how I apply this. So a bit on those shoulder blades, respect the curvature of that surface. A bit more here to draw the eye to the rear of his cuisse, his thigh plate. A bit there. Not the smoothest blend, but it will do for now. Catch a bit on that edge. Maybe the top. Here. Spot in the center. Again, to respect that curvature. And maybe again clean up this area slightly. Now, so the worst that can happen with highlighting the color like this is that you might start a bit of a back and forth where you keep adding a bit of a highlight and it becomes too light, or you make a mistake, or you add too much of a shade to correct it, and then it kind of darkens the whole area, and you kind of go back and forth a little bit. Yeah, oops, that kind of ran a bit, didn't it? It's okay, we'll let that dry. And we'll come back and fix that later. Yeah, you can be, suddenly stuck in a bit of a back and forth. It's not the worst. It's not the end of the world, I suppose, if that happens. It might take a little bit longer than you intend. But so long as you stick with it and just gradually go section by section, I believe it will look decent at the end of the day. So what I've just done is, because there was a bit of paint here that was pooling strangely, I kind of wicked it up with my brush, and I can re-establish a bit more of the red where a little bit of it was lost. What's going on over there in that recess? And over here, it's not red. Let's take a bit of black. I think that's actually a deep enough recess that it justifies the use of a bit of black. Yeah. Okay, so Now I want to take white and I want to come in and I want to sharpen that bone a little bit. So I'm using cold white from Vallejo. It's a particularly bright shade of white with like really high pigment levels. Oh no. Okay. Sorry guys, a bit of a crash and a fumble. Poor champion of Khorne ended up on the ground for a little while, but all is not lost, and we are back on the horse. I couldn't bring myself to let you guys like sit through me fumbling with super glue to fix like his shield and stuff. But yeah. Anyway, we're back. So as I was mentioning, yeah, this white, though the same spot of white hasn't dried, so it's not been that long. But yeah, will allow me to put some highlights while keeping the overall color scheme, fairly desaturated and not so cartoony, like I mentioned. So yeah, certain points of this model have an interesting shape to them. So for example, these ribs on his chest, pardon me as I rotate it to better reach those areas, they kind of sink in a little bit before popping back out again because they're based on, they're trying to mimic the look of real live human bones, right? And human ribs, I suppose, do that a little bit. They dip in and come out again. I'm taking a little bit of paint off the surface here, where it's kind of gone a little bit too much into the surface. Gone too much into the recess, I mean, the white. And yeah, man, that's looking a lot better already. Sometimes highlights only need to go on the knuckles or to draw the eye. They don't need to be a general highlight. I think that's one of the advantages of this approach to painting, is that you don't need to do a general highlight where you cover a lot of ground with a highlight. It's just not that efficient to do so. I prefer to let washes or contrast paint layers do the bulk of that initial gradation between light and dark on the surface, and then use highlights very sparingly to only target those areas that really need it. When I was a lot younger painting, I would spend ages with especially the first layer of highlights, which you were trying to correct all manner of errors on the surface. These days I just let contrast do that because I think that's the tool that's uniquely suited for that kind of work. And just apply sparingly highlights where it's needed. So I realized that you gain a better appreciation for the power of highlights to draw the eye when you paint in this way. You can be more targeted with how they lead the eye around the miniature. So this last shoulder pad, I think, is the other area to which I want to draw the eye. So a little bit on the edges, right, of the ends rather, not the edges, and then a little bit in that main part to establish that curvature. The flange I missed earlier. I'm from Singapore, so I have no idea why people find the word flange funny. Just kidding. Oh, it's got a second face growing out on his shoulder. Yeah, it's stuff like this that's really cool about these old models, right? Like, he's got stuff that you don't notice on the first pass necessarily. Now, when it comes to the horns, I think I'll just do a little bit of a pass on the edge, like that, just to draw the eye to that curvature. but not necessarily overemphasize it. Wondering about whether I want to put a dot of white on the eye, or whether that tends, because it's just white and red, whether it might tend too much towards pink. Wondering therefore whether no, more like Vallejo ice yellow, or a pale yellow rather, would be a better choice to dot that eye. I'ma think about that. Not the smoothest. But a bit of cleanup goes a long way, I think. Better. Getting better bit by bit. So a little bit more about me. I'm from Singapore, right, which is a very tropical country and very warm as a result, all year round. And therefore, sitting at home to paint is great. I think it's one of those hobbies that's a little bit understated and not very popular in Singapore, unfortunately. But hopefully, these videos might help, or it might reach people overseas, and let me learn a little bit more about the hobby as it's consumed overseas. Do you guys have a preference as to the kinds of models I do? Or are you okay just indulging me in painting a lot of these models which are personally important to me because they had such a big impact on me when I was growing up. I am a commission painter. I take commissions regularly. Most of my clients are local. Most of my clients also want more recent miniatures, much to my disappointment, but hey, I get it. It's more recent, it's more supported. I understand. I do feel that these models have a charm that the newer miniatures seem to lack, and I think a big part of that is down to digital sculpting. Digital sculpts are both better and worse, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not one of those people who have like a vendetta against the way Games Workshop is doing things these days. All I can say is that it's not entirely for me, but I get it. I think newer models have a charm of their own. I'm gonna go ahead and dot this. No. Okay, I'm gonna do it in yellow. Sorry, can't bring myself to potentially get a spot of pink in this eye. So yeah, I do commissions, and most of my commissions are more recent models. But painting these models are really where my heart's at. I'm gonna blend back down a bit of the silver that I added as highlights because I think I overdid it slightly, and it would benefit, especially on his knee, on his thigh pad here. Kind of overdid it, and this is a bit of that back and forth I was telling you about. If you find that you've overdone it a little bit, just take the time to come back in and re-establish a bit of that color. It's the glory of working with translucent paints, is that you can just keep building up layers, successive layers of it, and you can stop when you feel that you've hit a point that you're happy with. So yeah, better, much happier. Yes. Aha, yes, I need to highlight the skull as well. I guess this will make him the meta Khorne champion, right? Because like Khorne miniatures have a shocking amount of skulls. One of the jokes that my friends make is that you can almost tell the era of Games Workshop by how many skulls are on the miniature, SPM, skulls per miniature. And at one point it got ludicrous, right? I remember the Khorne demon character, Skull Taker, I think that's what his name was. The Herald of Khorne. He had a shocking number of skulls on him. I think at last count somebody counted it and they had like over 80 of them, because you know he had like skulls on chains, skulls as a cloak, like an entire like carpet of tiny little skulls as a cloak. He had them on his armor trim. He had them at the hilt of his sword. There's just a ridiculous number of skulls. And yeah, I guess when you are literally the Herald of Khorne, it's fine to have lots and lots of skulls. But I kind of like how reserved this model has been, until you look at his face and you realize his whole face is a skull. Kind of great. Okay, already feeling happier about the way this is looking. Now the face lacks definition because the contrast paint, ooh, that wasn't black. Okay, oops. Yeah, already the happier, but yeah, the face needs definition. So I'm going to grab a bit of black so I can use a little bit of that Vallejo white to create some gray with which to highlight his face. One of the other reasons why I like Vallejo colors, especially the lighter colors, is that, you know, they're a little bit thicker, so they combine well with contrast paint to create highlights. A lot of people, I think, I feel like a lot of people when they work with contrast paints, they don't know how to highlight them necessarily. They're not sure how to mix a color that would complement the contrast paint surface. I think you can mix contrast paint directly as highlights, so long as you use a fairly thick paint to be the color that you're lightening with. So in this case, this white allows you to really mix a color that you know you're going to highlight well with. And we did the same thing with the bronze, right? The bronze, or the brass rather, was highlighted using a mix of brass and silver, a mix of the wash and silver rather. I'm rambling slightly. That looks good, but I think it's a bit too harsh, so I think a bit of the black with some water and cut back the highlights a bit. There we go. And then, unbelievably, I've spotted a section of silver where I've completely failed to hit with our bronze glaze. Amazing. There we go. All there to create the blend. Now, I'm also at a bit of a quandary when it comes to rivets, because as much as I like the idea that you've got rivets on the surface, like visually they add interest to the surface, highlighting them, so it's such a pain. But I don't think I could leave this as is. So let's just very carefully hit them with the edge of a brush with silver mixed with a little bit of our shading mix, and re-emphasize some of the edges while we're at it. If it's too harsh, you can either wait and let it dry and apply a little bit more of your original shade, but I think I'm just going to take some paint off with the wet palette. Which is a good perk with using wet palettes, is that you can use them to essentially do what people achieve by licking brushes, which is to modulate the amount of moisture on the brush running a brush across a wet palette surface, I find does a fairly similar thing reasonably well. It's a decent analog for, I guess, your tongue. And it can have similar results, which is great, without landing you in the hospital for paint ingestion. Okay, it's getting better. A bit of silver there to draw the eye. Reinforce the shape of the horns. Build up a bit on the edges. Oh, I could see that this miniature is really one of those that I could see myself painting for hours and hours if I'm not careful. So I'm just going to finish off the weapon, I think, with a little bit of orange. I like using this color, light orange from Vallejo. Again, it's got quite a thick consistency, a bit of our previous red to create an in-between. Can you see? I hope you can see. Sorry if I was off camera. Yeah. Yeah. And then we'll use this as a highlight. And just carefully apply it to the edges of the blade. But I say my hands are a bit fumbly today, and the reason is actually because I was working with super glue earlier, and it's built up a little bit on my thumb and forefinger on my right hand, and that means that a little bit more likely to drop things because it takes away your fingerprint, right? It fills in your fingerprints, and that makes your hands a little bit less frictiony. Can result in you dropping things, unfortunately, as I have already earlier in this episode. Okay, the next one, I'm going to go more or less pure on the edges. A bit of a line down the center. You know, I am holding my breath to do highlights on these more finicky areas because I stopped talking. Or at least I have to stop talking for a little while. Use a little bit for that series of runes down the center of his blade. Just enough to suggest their presence. Don't really want to go picking them out individually bit by bit because even though I could do that, it'll take a really long time. And I don't think they're really that crucial to the look of the miniature. I think this is just fine. There we go. So, barring some last minute touch-ups, I think our boy has progressed to a really nice point. Again, as and yeah, like I said, I can see myself going back and forth to refine the blends and the smoothness on this miniature over and over again for a really long time, as I'm inevitably already doing now. But I don't think it's going to very much change the look of the miniature. So let me just drop some ice yellow into his eyes. Hopefully won't mess that up on camera. And then I feel comfortable to do the edge and finish off the episode. So I hope you've enjoyed this as I start talking about it like it's over. But yeah, this has been one of my favorite models to paint. It's been so much fun. And I think it turned out so much better than I thought it would. Yeah, there we go. Nice menacing glow. I'm gonna never go if you think you're hard enough. Is what he's saying with his posture. So threatening. Love it. Okay, let's do the edge. And for the edges, I'll use my typical brown leather from Scale Color. No real reason other than this is the closest analog I found to old school's GW Scorch Brown, a color that I use extensively, and I find it gives a good, fairly friction resistant coat on the edge. Nice and matte as well. Nothing worse than a satin finish on something that's not supposed to draw the eye too much. The edge of the base. So I think this is going to be one of the longer videos that I've done so far. But I can only imagine these videos, well, they'll either get longer as I do larger models or more involved miniatures, or they might get shorter as I speed up. And you know, I guess I run out of topics to talk about and prattle on about. Let me know in the comments which you think will be the result, whether I speed these up or I slow them down. But regardless, I intend to show you everything, with the sole exception of when I drop a model, I need to fix it on off camera. But yeah, I intend to show you everything that I do to a miniature, paint job wise, in one sitting. And this is our boy. I am pretty proud of him, and I think he's a worthy start to our Chaos Warrior Regiment of Khorne. Now I can see a lot of room for improvement, but I think for now we'll just leave it as this. There we go, that's our boy. Hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Love y'all. Bye.